This is Writer's Voices with Monica and Caroline. I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and with me is my co-host and mother, Caroline Kilborn.
And good afternoon, everyone. And this is you really want to hear this, and you're going to want to tell all your friends. Okay, first of all, we have a gentleman who has written a book called Being the Change. Live Well and a Spark in Climate Revolution. Peter, how do you pronounce it?
Kalmus.
Kalmus.
Peter Kalmus. He says Thomas with a K.
Okay,
Peter Kalmus.
And this is an interesting book. It's full. There's so many things in it. You start reading and you just think, oh my gosh, yeah, that's right. And then,
And Peter's an atmospheric scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab with a PhD in physics from Columbia University, but he's speaking and writing on his own behalf, not on NASA's.
Yes.
And he lives in suburban Altadena, California, with his wife and 2 children on 1/10 the fossil fuels of the average American.
And he has several ways in which you do that, and they are very interesting.
And some of the ways he writes about remind us a little bit of someone who's not with us anymore.
Yeah, Monica's father. He was way beyond his.
He was, in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. He was definitely not a hippie, but he was into the Back to the Land movement.
Yeah,
and sustainable living before that was what it was called. And in a sense, I think that's what this book is about, being the change, live well and spark a climate revolution. Welcome to Writer's Voices, Peter.
Well, thanks so much for having me. What a pleasure.
Now, sustainable living is actually a word that we use a lot around here. The local Maharishi University of Management has a sustainable living degree program. A lot of focus on it. I'm on the, was until quite recently, on the board of the Sustainable Living Coalition. So it's a topic of great interest in our little town here. Have you ever been to Fairfield?
No, I haven't. But we do drive through Iowa sometimes when we travel from Los Angeles to visit our parents in Illinois. So my wife actually hails from Sterling, Illinois, which is pretty close to the Quad Cities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's not far.
No, we're not far from the Quad Cities, so hop down here sometime.
So
the next time we come, I can come visit.
Yeah, good.
Have you heard about Fairfield before?
No, I haven't. It sounds like a lovely community. I love the fact that your station is powered by solar electricity.
It
is. We're broadcasting with solar power now.
That's right, and I think it's one of the only radio stations in the world, or at least in the United States, that does this. So, do you talk about solar power in your book?
A little bit. It's interesting. One of the early things that I thought about doing as I was navigating my own changes was to put solar panels on my roof. I mean, it's extremely sunny here. It's probably one of the most sunny locations in the United States. So solar makes a lot of sense here. But we use too little electricity to make that worthwhile. So none of the solar lease companies would be willing to do that. They didn't have systems that were small enough for us, and that would make economic sense. And the payback period, I worked it out, would have been like 40 years or something. And I simply purchased renewable electricity from my utility when they finally offered it about a year ago. So I lived here for 8 years with fossil fuel electricity before they finally offered that, unfortunately. And now I push for something called community choice aggregation, which is a program available in some states, including California and Illinois. I'm not sure about Iowa, but it's a way that communities can actually band together, so coalitions of cities and counties, and decide how they would like to produce their electricity. And then the utility, by law, the existing utility, is required to carry it and deliver it through their existing infrastructure and then provide the billing services. So this is a way for communities to create, medium scale to large scale solar projects. For example, keep those jobs and keep that, keep those projects within their community. They can make visible projects that are on the front lines of, communities that are maybe being overlooked in the larger kind of climate action movement. So it's a wonderful way for communities to kind of become more conscious about how their electricity is produced, and then in one fell swoop, all of Los Angeles County, for example, can become renewable. So I thought that was more important than
Then your individual.
Struggling with my own rooftop, which it just didn't. Unfortunately for us, it just didn't make sense.
And is that community aggregation happening anywhere? Has it been implemented?
Yeah, it was. Early adopters were Marin County and Sonoma County, a little bit further north of us. And what they found was that they could generate renewable electricity at a much higher fraction of renewable and sell it for cheaper to their customers than the for-profit utility could manage. So it was kind of a no-brainer. It was a win-win. And Los Angeles is implementing a similar CCA, which we'll start switching over to that in 2018. So it's coming quite soon.
Wow.
That is really great.
Well, in Iowa, we've been really forward with the wind power. I believe something like 25% of our electricity is now generated by wind in the state of Iowa, mostly in northern Iowa, which is very windy.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Down here in southern Iowa, we have two very strong solar energy companies here in Fairfield. I am invested in a couple of commercial buildings that we have the solar rooftop panels, but they can't produce 100% of the electricity needed by the building. At times it's 100% or even more. And fortunately, we still have net metering here, which means basically that when we're producing more than we use, it feeds into the grid. But other times, it's.
So storage is going to be a big part of this transition, as will being able to more easily move electricity from region to region. So when one region is overproducing, other regions can use it.
Now, your book is focused really more on what you as an individual, how you changed your life and ways that weren't painful for you.
Right. So, of course, there is, I think, an intimate connection between individual change and collective change. So I view society as a sort of a kind of like a wave that's where individuals are the water molecules, and we all kind of make up the culture, and we're moved by the culture, and we move the culture. But yeah, I grew in awareness about global warming. I started out as an astrophysicist, and as my awareness grew, I was getting so distracted thinking about climate science that I finally realized I had to make a career shift. And then I started to realize that I was contributing to the problem myself by burning fossil fuels, and I wanted to explore ways to use less fossil fuel in my own life. So I started by quantifying how I was producing those emissions, where they were coming from. I realized a lot of my emissions were coming from flying, because scientists fly a lot. So this was in around 2010, and I was flying about 50,000 miles a year. And so I started reducing my flying. I started biking, which I genuinely enjoy, and my wife enjoys as well. And it helps keep us healthy, and it helps keep us more connected to the community. And it's just, frankly, just a really joyful thing to be going down a hill in the open air on a bicycle. We started growing food. So while flying was the biggest source of my own emissions, it turned out that my diet was the second biggest source. And both of those things were big surprises for me that I wouldn't have ever known if I hadn't actually just sat down and worked it out. So I started changing how I got my food. I switched to vegetarianism, which strangely caused food to actually start tasting better to me, and made me feel like I had more energy. And growing food, which tastes wonderful. There's a huge variety of fruit trees that we can grow here in suburban Los Angeles. So I've got pomegranates that are ripe right now, figs that are ripe, the oranges and lemons, and grapefruits finished. Avocados that's my favorite tree, the avocado tree, and it's going to be producing a huge crop, which we'll start being able to harvest in a couple of months. So, so I really enjoy these changes.
Yeah, well, of course, in Southern California, fine, but there's a lot of places that we don't have that opportunity. But I suppose we can adjust by planting other things that we can use.
Right, you can't grow oranges there, but you can definitely grow apples, and you can grow
plums, pears,
and
peaches.
lots of things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the things, when you talk about riding your bike, one of the things that always shocks me is even in a small town, but certainly in the city, how many people will get in the car to drive a mile to the gym to work out?
Mm-hmm. I think it just stems from a lack of awareness. Essentially, they just don't know what they're missing, and it's unfortunate. I think a lot of people who don't bike, if they tried it, they sort of have the same discovery that I made, that it's just really fun to use your body to move through space.
It is, and when I bike both here, and I also live part-time in Austin, and there I don't own a bike, but I use the bike share program. And I love being able to get from here to there and with just under my own power. Now, the thing that holds me back besides weather in Iowa, a lot of times is time. You know, we're rushing from one thing to the next. I've got an appointment here, a meeting here, and I feel like I just don't have the time to bike from place to place. How do you deal with that?
I think that's such a big part of this picture, is that, you know, we live, in my opinion, a life that's too fast-paced. And I think that we'd be happier if we slow down a little bit. And fossil fuels literally fuel this frenetic moving around really quickly, and all the noise from it. You know, we've lots of helicopters going over our house here, noise from freeways, and, you know, I guess I'm just sort of turning into one of those people who prefers things to go a little more slowly and to be a little bit more quiet. I really enjoy silence and stillness. So, yeah, I'm. That's part of why, you know, I'm advocating for a shift away from fossil fuels. I think we'd all benefit from slowing down a little bit.
Yeah. So, what made you decide to write this book, Peter?
Right. So it was 2010, and like I said, I was surprised that a lot of these changes, as I gradually transitioned away from fossil fuels step by step, were actually causing me to feel more satisfaction and more connection with my community and more connection with the land and with my food supply. And so it was a very satisfying path, and I thought that message needed to be shared, that a shift away from fossil fuels, especially when viewed in light of global warming and sort of the urgent need for this transition. So it becomes very meaningful to start pioneering this path and to start exploring this path. And I thought that was a message that wasn't being, I didn't see that being broadcast widely enough. So that was the main driver behind the book.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Peter Kalmus, author of Being the Change, Live Well, and Spark a Climate Revolution, which is now a featured documentary. Do you want to tell us about that, where we can watch it?
Yeah, well, it's not quite ready. It's hard making a documentary film, and so I think it's going to be ready in late fall. So I've been told November. And this should air on PBS, and it will probably be distributed by other channels, but I honestly am not sure how that's going to work since I've never been through this process before. But, you know, I'm excited for the film and a little bit apprehensive because this is such a politically charged topic. Even writing a book as a climate scientist felt a little bit frightening to me, you know, like I'm putting myself out there and speaking out and kind of making myself a target in some sense. And the film, you know, which features my family, is more so. But I felt that, like I do with you know, speaking out in the book and going on your show, for example, you know, I'm so concerned about what we're doing as a species to this biosphere that gives us all life, that I feel it's far more important for me to speak out than to have a safe career.
Now, you do put a lot of science into this, don't you, into the book?
But yeah, there's 2 chapters that talk about the science behind global warming. You know, I focused on giving sort of the basic story, how we know what we know and what we don't know, and what the uncertainties are, and what the timescales are. How quickly is this unfolding? How long will it last? I felt like this was important to give the book kind of to make it grounded in the science, in order to give it a sense of urgency that would maybe make some of my changes, give that more of a context, right? Because, living on a tenth of fossil fuels could appear to some people to be a little bit extreme, but maybe when weighed against what we're doing and the urgency of change, maybe it's not extreme enough.
Wow. What do you recommend, flying, as you said, is one of the largest culprits. But if you need to get from here to there, what do you do instead? Are you not going to bike cross country?
Well, you can bike cross country. I actually did when after a summer job, when I was right after I graduated from college. I was working a summer job in New Mexico, and I didn't know what to do with my life after it ended. So I bought a bicycle from REI for $300 and rode home to Illinois to my parents' house. And it was one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life. And that's still the bicycle that I ride around today.
Oh, my gosh.
It's a great bike. So you can do that. It's actually, quite a bike doesn't go really that much slower than a car. So you can go 100 miles in a day on a bike, and if you have the time, that's actually a really healthy way to travel. We also, Illinois is a common place for us to go to because of our parents, of course, and I also have a sister there, and my wife has some family in the Twin Cities and in Wisconsin. So we drive on vegetable oil sometimes. We actually just finished the 3,500-mile trip up to the Pacific Northwest on vegetable oil. So I did a few book events, and I met the publisher, and we did see the eclipse in Oregon, which was amazing and fun.
Oh, wow.
And visited a lot of friends along the way. And we take the train sometimes, too. So the train in this country is certainly not as good as it could be. I think with a little bit of new infrastructure and a little bit of planning and design, we could easily have trains in this country that went twice as fast as what we have now. And we could make those trains electric and run them off of those wind turbines that you see, which would be fantastic. So there are definitely ways to travel without planes. Crossing oceans is a little bit more difficult, but that's possible as well, as I explain in the book. It just takes the shift in mindset, right? We need to think about travel as just like food, as something that is precious, not something that we take for granted. And we have to be willing to do it in a slower and more connected and in my opinion, more adventurous way.
Have you ever heard of RAGBRAI?
Of what? Of RAGBRAI, yes, of course. Yeah, I used to think about doing it, but unfortunately I never have. But it sounds like a great party to me.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's...
Have you guys done it?
No, it's a great adventure. My daughter-in-law does it, and she has she bikes with a group, which is a good idea. And I've also had some friends who had unfortunate accidents because when you're all these bicyclists and somebody drops something and then they get off their bike to pick it up, then it's a bad deal. But so there has to be...
Yeah, and I get a lot of sort of pushback about the biking because of people who are concerned about accidents. And probably the most serious accident I had was on a bicycle when I was, I think it was when I was in 8th grade, so I was quite young and I wasn't paying attention. And I was riding at night without a light. You do have to be very careful, and you do have to bike in a smart way. But one of the big surprises that I discovered when I was writing this book is that if you look at all causes of mortality in a statistical way, the way actuaries do, biking is actually safer than driving. If you do say a 5-mile bike commute, or even a 2-mile bike commute one way, the benefits of reduced heart disease, which is such a dangerous thing as we age, so heart attacks and strokes, the reduced risk from dying from heart disease far, far outweighs the risk from injuries. It's like a factor of 10 to 1 or something. So
wow.
So biking is actually safer when you look at it in a more holistic way.
Now, here in Fairfield, they have bike trails, don't they, on the...
We have a great bike trail around the city. It was a lot of it's old reclaimed railroad bed.
But I mean, even on the streets.
Oh, yeah, along the streets, too, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And as more people bike, it'll become safer because drivers will start to see bicyclists more. That's called the safety in numbers effect. And infrastructure, better, safer infrastructure, bike infrastructure will follow as more people start to get on those bikes.
What do you think of electric bikes?
I think they're great. I don't have one myself, but I have a lot of friends who have them, and they absolutely love them. So, yeah, I think they're fantastic.
My brother Joel just got one so he can keep up with his wife, the Ragbri rider.
Well, there's a man that goes by...
It's far easier to electrify a bike than it is to electrify a car, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
There's a man that goes by my house, and it looks like he's skiing. He's riding a bike, but it looks like he's skiing. And I don't know what they call that bike, but he can go pretty fast on it, I'll tell you.
Well, Peter, we don't have a lot of time left. Let's talk a little bit about when you were writing the book. How did you decide what to put in, what to leave out, and what's kind of the overall structure of this book?
Okay, so the structure is pretty much, I think, maybe what you would expect. It's got two parts. The first part is called predicament. So that describes the interconnected predicament that we have, of which global warming is probably the most urgent and severe symptom. So this includes overpopulation. I think I agree with most experts that the number of people on the planet living the way that we're living has exceeded the Earth's carrying capacity. And exponential growth mindset, this need that we have for an economy to always be growing exponentially. Otherwise, we face recession, and that's just not a good design for an economy on a finite planet. So we need to start thinking about how to move beyond that somehow to a steady-state economy. And the second part of the book is called A Mammal in the Biosphere. So this part was more fun for me to write. It was the first part it took a lot of research, and some of the research was you had to think about topsoil depletion and aquifer depletion, and some of it wasn't. It was a little frightening for me to be constantly thinking about that stuff, to be honest. The second part is about what one individual can do in the face of this predicament, and that was the key question, which was another motivator for me to write this book, because I hadn't seen that addressed in a way that I found personally satisfying and meaningful anywhere in the literature. So I was reading a lot and looking far and wide. And,
this one, you really did hit the spot on that, because it's fine to talk about something, but if you can really put it into practice, that's the key.
Yeah, and the fact is, we'd all love to save the world, but all we can really do is change the world, which we're all doing every day, whether we're aware of it or not.
Right.
And we're all limited. Like we're single human animals in this vast biosphere, which is facing this vast predicament from our collective action. So what can we do that's goes way beyond recycling and changing our light bulbs? What can we do that's really meaningful to grapple with this problem? There's certainly existential elements here, or if you would prefer, maybe spiritual elements, because it affects so deeply how we interact with this biosphere, how we live our lives, how we interact as a community. And, we're causing the sixth mass extinction and displacing non-humans from this planet. And to me, that's a very sad thing. So that affects me at an emotional level.
Right.
So yeah, the second part is grappling with these issues. And, I speak in the first person and discuss the changes that I made, which, some of them might resonate with various readers and some of them might not. And I hope that readers find their own ways for responding to this. And, then as a community, we can start to have this discussion and help each other along the path.
Right. Peter, in the couple minutes we have left, let's talk a little bit more about the food issue, because I think you were surprised, and I'm surprised, that is the second largest culprit for most people. Is it mainly the transportation of food that's causing that, or how it's produced in the first place?
It's all of the above. So producing meat accounts for about, animal agriculture accounts for about 10 to 20%, so maybe around 15% of the total greenhouse gas burden. So about 15% of global warming is due from animal agriculture, but that comes also from clearing forests to create pastures. It comes from using nitrogen to make fertilizer, which then becomes nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas, to grow the grain that we feed the animals and so forth. And then, of course, there's processing, there's packaging, there's transportation of the food.
Yeah,
so
it goes on and on. Yeah.
Basically, use fossil fuel to create a food system that allows maybe 1% of us or less in the United States to actually participate in the production of food, whereas maybe 100 years ago, almost half of us were involved in some way in food production. So, maybe in the name of convenience, we've become detached from our food production. And in my opinion, there is a permaculturist named Fukuoka who says that in his opinion, if 100% of people were growing food, it would be ideal. And I think that this whole food discussion is really closely tied to global warming.
And growing your own food or going to farmers markets for supporting locally grown food, I think. Yeah,
I'm becoming more aware of food, and maybe I found a way to dip into the waste stream, which maybe not everyone. That's a good example of something that not everyone might be willing to do, but I really enjoy that. So wasting less food, growing more food, trading with neighbors. So when I have way too many avocados for my family, I trade that with neighbors who are growing other things that I'm not growing. So this builds community too. I mean, there's a lot of connection between growing food and growing community.
Yep.
So I just want to remind our listeners that we're talking to Peter Kalmus, author of Being the Change, Live Well, and Spark a Climate Revolution. And this book is available wherever books are sold. Is there? And do you have a website for the book?
Yeah, it's beingthechangebook.com, and people can contact me through that website if they like.
Great.
Well, I highly recommend this book. I mean, it's just full of all kinds of things that you can do.
And there's a whole lot more we could get into, like the whole humanure aspect.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a surprise. Just let me ask real quickly, is your toilet indoors or out?
It used to be indoors, and now it's outdoors. We actually built a kind of outdoor shower, and we made it big enough to put the, we call it the leaf toilet, to put that out there. So now we have two bathrooms, because that was a big gripe of my wife, actually, that we only had one bathroom in the house.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Peter. And Mom, do you have a closing quote for this?
The problem is that there's so many people that just don't want to believe this, because most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted, like this is the way it is. Let's just, yeah, right.
All right. Thank you, Peter. And we'll look forward to the documentary on PBS for Being the Change.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
And see you next week on Writers' Voices.